Welcome to Dinosaur Radio, everyone. This is Brooks Kubik with John Wood, and we're here to bring you what we hope is going to be a hard-hitting, informative, and very interesting, and hopefully regular radio podcast show covering everything that you know and love: old school strength training, workouts, exercises, iron game history, the whole 9 yards. John, how you doing?
Oh, I'm great, Brooks. Thanks for having me. And man, we've been talking about doing Dinosaur Radio for a long time, and finally here we are.
Yeah, absolutely. And as folks can see, we're doing this via a Zoom call, and you'll be able to see both of us on it, hopefully in some kind of a nice looking split screen format, and be able to hear both of us. And we're going to have lots of fun with this. So this is the first installment, if you will, or the first episode of Dinosaur Radio. And what I wanted to talk about on this show is something new that just came out, or I guess it's old and new. It's the Dinosaur Files Newsletter for December 2020. And John, you've seen it. How do you like the issue?
Well, it's great. It's another great one, as usual. There are many different reasons to enjoy the Dinosaur Files. I think that one big one is that the fact that it's something new and relevant that comes out on a regular basis. You can't always trust what you find on the internet, and the history of bodybuilding magazines also teaches us that they may have been entertaining, but at the same time, how informative they were was always a little bit suspect. So I think with the Dinosaur Files, it's great because you're getting the stuff that comes directly from the trenches. This is what people are using. This is what's working right now.
Yeah, and I like your use of the term from the trenches, because really that's part of the whole genesis of the Dinosaur Files. Some people might not know, of course, but some people may not know that I published Dinosaur Training, the book, Dinosaur Training, Lost Secrets of Strength and Development, back in 1996. And to my surprise, it was a huge hit, and around the world bestseller among Iron Game fans. And it was so much of a hit, and I was getting so much feedback from people. And people were wanting more, and they were wanting to share things that they were doing. And so in 1997, I started the first Dinosaur Files. Mm-hmm. I did it in a hard copy format. Hard copy meaning, of course, ink on paper as opposed to pixels on screen. And kept that going, monthly issues for 5 years. I got real busy at work. I was working as an attorney then, and got super busy on some big cases, and I had to stop the Dinosaur Files in 2002. I just didn't have time for it. I started the files up again later on, and I guess I probably had it going more or less continuously since about 2010. And I don't know how many issues I've had over the years, but there have been a lot of them. Mm-hmm. And most of them on a monthly basis. Sometimes we did bi-monthly, and 1 year we tried quarterly issues, but we've eventually settled on the monthly. And we're now we've moved away completely from the ink on paper format, and we're doing a PDF format with electronic delivery. So it's a PDF that I prepare. Each issue is 16, 18 pages. People order it, they get a link, and they can download and read it, or they can download and print it, which is, a nice, simple way of doing it. And of course, a very good way of doing it in this era of COVID and the mail slowdowns and deliverability issues with mail, the cost of mail delivery, particularly for overseas readers, international readers. So the Dino Files has been a really good thing from that perspective. But from day one, I've always tried to do the from the trenches approach, meaning that if you get an issue of the Dinosaur Files, you don't just see something that I've written. I always have articles in it. I have an editorial, I have, news items, bits of interesting information for people in many issues. workouts, workout routines, training articles, Iron Game history articles, things like that. But what I also try to put in each issue is a nice mix of things from other readers.
Mm-hmm.
And in doing that, of course, I'm following the old approach that the muscle magazines followed pretty much from their inception around the turn of the century, 1900 or so, when we started having physical culture magazines, strength training magazines, and so on. And moving up until about, I would say maybe somewhere in the mid-50s, somewhere in the mid-60s. And a change occurred, and I'll address that in a second. But initially, the magazines included lots of feedback from people who were sharing things they were doing that were working. Like, here's how I made a squat rack. Here's a real good program that built my military press. You know, here's something I used to gain 20 pounds of muscle. Mm-hmm. And people were sharing those, and they were getting printed as articles. And so if you look at those magazines, and I know that, of course, you've got a, virtually complete collection of all the old stuff. You've seen it all. If you look at that, you see a lot of, here's what I'm doing, here's how I'm doing things, here's what works for me, mm-hmm. from ordinary people. And somewhere in the 1950s, and then really in the 1960s, there was a big change. And all of the articles, or the vast majority of them, began to focus on the champions. Would you say that's consistent with what you've seen in viewing the muscle mags?
Oh, there's no question. And you can understand why to some extent. They had to sell magazines, they had to sell, other things, supplements, equipment, things like that. They had to promote themselves. And very much so, that still goes on today. We get the superlative, straight stuff from the insiders, the top people in the sport, and I suppose that has its place in some degree. But at the same time, in doing so, they left behind people that they just were happy to train and get results. They left behind a lot of practicality. You actually saw articles in a lot of the earlier publications for the older lifter, whereas all that type of thing started to disappear in favor of the champions, and it became more of an entertainment enterprise than a educational enterprise.
Peary Rader had a phrase that he used. He referred to older trainees, and back then an older trainee was like age 35 or 40. You were supposedly way too old to train after age 40. But Peary Rader, I think, started using this phrase in the 1950s. He referred to older trainees as the forgotten man. The idea being, these are not people who are competing for world championships or in the Olympics or anything like that. They're not in the Mr. America contest. They're not competing in anything. Remember, back then, there really was no masters competition in any sport. And because of that, they just drop out of sight. We don't know what they're doing. We don't know how they're training. We don't know what works for them. And we're not giving them articles that are specifically aimed at helping them in dealing with the often unique problems or challenges that an older trainee faces. And that's something that he tried to do in Ironman for many years while he still had the magazine. And that's one thing that I do a lot of in the Dinosaur Files. And in fact, most of our readers are older trainees, and that means we have a lot of articles by, from, about older trainees and what really works for them. Mm-hmm. The December issue, you and I were talking the other day, and you mentioned that there were an awful lot of articles in that issue dealing with unique challenges facing older trainees. And I went back and I counted it up, and in one issue, the December 2020 issue, you get things that worked, changes that had to be made, exercise programs used by some variation of that theme for 9 different older trainees, plus me, and I'm 63, so I guess I qualify as an older trainee too. So that makes 10. So if you're looking for something that's real world stuff, it's not made up, and it's not trying to sell you a food supplement, it's not trying to sell you some kind of hormones or chemicals or some kind of therapy. It's not trying to pull you into a support group so that everybody can sit around the fire and, bang the tom-tom and do whatever groups like that do. It's just how to train. Things that work, you get it from 10 people, real life people who've addressed the challenges of being an older and ever more older from year to year trainee, which I don't think you find anywhere else.
No, and I think there's a very important point that comes along with that, in that when you look around on the internet, and to some degree when the magazines were around, this also occurred too, you'd be doing something that was working for you, it was working very well. And maybe it was a routine that you were engaged in very consistently, you're getting results, everything's going great. And then you go to some forum somewhere and somebody says, how about this program? And all of a sudden you say, wow, I should be doing that. And you totally junk everything you were doing and start doing this other thing. Mm-hmm. And it gets you off track, and it probably screws up the entire thing you had a good thing going. Mm-hmm. Or maybe you read something and you start second guessing yourself, or whatever the case is, you get off track by having all this other stuff going on. Whereas you read something in the Dinosaur Files, maybe it's going to reinforce some stuff you're already doing. You're thinking, hey, that guy's training pretty close to what I'm doing and he's getting great results. It's not going to allow you to get off track, or maybe it's going to give you the confidence to say, hey, I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing rather than get off track with all this other stuff. So I think that's a very important role that the Dinosaur Files can fill for a lot of trainees out there.
It really is. And I get so many emails. Tell me if you get emails like this too. It's something like, got a question. I've been following this routine, getting great results, but I read somewhere, or I saw somewhere, or I was talking to someone who said whatever. So now I think I'm going to change things and try something else totally different. What do you think?
Yeah. You
get that email?
A carbon copy a couple times a week, sometimes daily.
Yeah.
And my feeling, and I've addressed this before, it's like, and the interesting thing is that sometimes it's somebody that it might just be some random person. You don't even know his real name. Mm-hmm. That's telling you, don't do that. You should be doing this. Well, they don't know you. They don't know anything about you. They don't know how you train, what you like doing, what your situation is. But what it serves is to get you off track. And I've seen situations where somebody's been training and gaining and getting good results for a year, and then all of a sudden they start going off on this weird tangent, and it essentially undoes all the hard work that they've accumulated for a sustained period of time. For what? Just because some random guy on the internet says that you should be doing this program and not that program. So I think that the consistency that you're going to get, the practicality that you're going to get from the stuff that you're reading in the Dinosaur Files serves a function beyond simply showing you how and what to do.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And by the way, I've got, you probably have this too, I've got sort of a standard reply or a canned response to anybody who says, I'm following a routine, I'm getting great results, but, and then they talk about how they want to change to something else for whatever reason. Mm-hmm. And my response is always, if you're getting good results, that's very rare. And most people in training do not get any kind of results, let alone good results. If you're getting good results, keep doing what you're doing. Mm-hmm. Now, eventually, the gains will start to slow down. That's just part of what happens. You don't make progress on any given routine forever. It's not perpetual. There comes a time when you do need to make changes. They may not need to be big changes, but you need to make changes. Okay, but that happens when your gains, your progress slows down. It doesn't happen just because you read something on the internet and you want to try something different.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're doing something and you're getting good results, stick with it.
Mm-hmm.
But the other side of the coin is, don't turn off your mind and stop thinking about training as long as you're studying sensible, real-world, drug-free training.
Mm-hmm.
And an example would be my own relatively recent history with isometric training.
Mm-hmm.
You started. Actually, we probably should talk with people about how the whole thing started. My part of it is, when I was a kid growing up, I was kind of like at the tail end of the 1950s/1960s isometrics craze. I started training in like 1969 or so. So I saw a lot of things about isometrics. The coaches all knew about isometrics. We all did some isometric training for sports. You saw some of it in the muscle magazines, some of it in the coaching magazines, if you read things like Scholastic Coach and Athlete, magazines like that. But I found that the kind of isometrics I was doing back then, 6 seconds per position, that sort of thing, weren't working very well for me, and that weight training worked better. And so I kind of forgot about isometrics and just never really did them. I did isometronics, partial movement with weight in the power rack, but I never viewed that as really an isometric form of training. I thought of it as more of a weight training type thing. So fast forward 50 years later, okay, now I'm 63, and I read some things that you posted in the Iron League website.
Mm-hmm. So
pick up the story there with why you posted about isometrics in the Iron League website, and then we'll eventually wrap back into how I took and ran with it and what I'm doing and sharing in the Dinosaur Files. But tell people how you sort of revived the isometric idea on the Iron League.
Well, I took one of Bob Hoffman's books, Functional Isometric Contraction, and initially I started reproducing it just for the sake of having a historical document on training, a particular era of training or epoch of training. And in order to do that, we had to retype it and look through it and go over it with a fine-tooth comb. And as I'm reading through it, I'm thinking there's some real interesting ideas here that I never really thought of that way. When people think of isometrics, and I made this mistake too, usually their mind goes to, oh, you push your hands together for 6 seconds, or you push against the door frame for 6 seconds, or 10 seconds, or whatever the case may be. And that kind of thing may have some use in some ways, but Hoffman's view, good or bad, was that isometrics was all kinds of things. It was anytime a weight was paused in a particular position, that counted as isometrics, and that's not too far off from the technical definition. But to him, a back lift was isometrics, a harness lift, a hip lift. There are other things involved. He has information in the book itself which are very similar to a lot of training techniques that would make their appearances decades later. He's got measured movement. He's got partial training. He's got something very similar to super slow. I mean, this is in the early 1960s. So to me, it was not so much that it was isometrics is a thing. It's a series of techniques and ideas that you can take and apply and experiment with and do all kinds of interesting things with. And I thought that was useful, and I thought that was beneficial. So put all this together in a course, started to add some, some insight and some other ideas and things on top of that. And you were able to kind of have a similar experience with reading this material. You're thinking, wow, I never thought of it that way before. And so you took some things that you read, applied it into your own training in a meaningful way, and then all of a sudden, before you know it, you're getting better results than you've ever got from most of the types of training you've ever done.
That's exactly what happened. And I was really struck with Hoffman's very broad definition of isometric training in his book, which I think was from, 61, 62, something like that?
First edition was in 62, and then there was a slightly expanded edition that came out in 1964.
Yeah, and he has, I think in several places in the book, he lists everything that he considers to be under the umbrella or under the tent of isometrics. And it's like 12 or 15 different things to do.
Yeah, and it was also tied into the power rack, which the very first commercial power rack that I know of that was created and sold, that happened at the same time, but also he gave all kinds of interesting ideas that could be done with that, which there was some marketing there, there's no question, but then also he was absolutely right in that the power rack allowed people to do things that they just simply were not able to do, or to be able to do things more easier and more efficiently than they were able to do without it. So, good or bad, it was a major contribution to the history of strength training.
Well, it absolutely was. And that kind of ties into my journey, because I had always done isometrics either with one of the old-fashioned devices with a bar and chain, and the chain resists your movement, and so that's how you do your isometric. Those never worked very well for me at all, and I really didn't have very good results with those when I was a kid. The power rack was another way to do isometrics and/or isometronics. As I've said, I have always had great results with isometronic training, heavy partials in the power rack, limited movement with heavy weights. But you can also do isometrics in the power rack. Mm-hmm. And those, and then the one muscle against the other, you do a curl with your right hand and push down with the triceps, push down with your left hand, and, that's an isometric, and then you reverse the movement and so on. Those are really the only types of things that people think of, for the most part, when they think of isometrics. But Hoffman had a lot of other suggestions. Mm-hmm. And the interesting thing for my training was, for the first time, God, in a long time, something like probably about 20 or 30 years, I've been without a power rack. Mm-hmm. And the reason for that, people may not know this, but Trudy and I moved from Louisville, Kentucky, where we had lived for many years, to Port Townsend, Washington in 2019. And I'm trying to think, was it 2018 or 2019? Yeah, 2019, summer of 2019.
It was a little over a year ago.
Yeah, and we weren't able to take a lot of stuff with us. We did a big downsizing. We live in a small bungalow in Port Townsend that we rent. And I wasn't able to bring all of the weights and the weight equipment that I had used when I was in Louisville. So before moving, I sold everything to, dyno guys in Louisville, in the Louisville area, who wanted the equipment. So that was a good deal. It's ended up in good hands with good people using it. And when we got here, I didn't have much in the way of equipment, and I did not have a power rack. Okay. So last summer, I was working out, and I was reading about the isometric stuff that you were putting out, and I was trying to think, what could I do for my legs that would be an isometric type thing, so I could get some of that good isometric action going in my leg training. And I decided to do, and this was really stupid, but, I've been doing this for only 50 plus years, so I really, I'm not old enough to know better, right? So I was actually doing quarter squat static holds with a barbell in the barbell squat. And I was doing them using some old York squat stands that I had, the vintage standalone, unfortunately very unwieldy stands. And I was doing them in the backyard. So I've got the bar in my back and I'm, doing my first set. This is cool. I rack it and I guess I hit one side of the rack a little too hard compared to the other side. You can do that.
Mm-hmm.
And the next thing I know, bang, everything goes crashing down. And luckily, I was out from underneath the bar when that happened. But barbell went down, plates went everywhere, and the two squat stands went down. And if it had happened in the garage, we have a garage here, a small garage. If it had happened in the garage, it would have totally destroyed the concrete floor, which is not good because, again, I'm a redder. And, it was a good thing it happened on the grass in the backyard, and it was a good thing that I wasn't under the bar when everything went south. So I'm sitting there thinking, okay, probably need to look for another exercise to do that's a little bit safer. And I thought of doing a number of different movements. I was chatting with a longtime dinosaur, Peter Yates, who's a contributor to the Dinosaur Files, shared the problem with him, and he suggested something that he had learned from you, the lunge, which is, I know, leg training exercise that you've done a lot of work with over the last years. And Peter said, lunges are pretty good, you ought to try them. And I thought, well, okay, I'll do that. And then I thought, well, since I'm doing a lot of other isometric type things, why don't I try isometric lunges? So I tried that, and it worked great. And I thought, gee, I wonder if anyone else has ever done this. So I sat down and I started doing some research, and I started finding things about people doing various types of lunges and other body weight exercises with isometric modalities, a lot of different ways to do them. So I started trying some of them and experimenting with them, along with some bone strength training I was doing and some standard barbell and dumbbell work. And I started to suddenly gain noticeable muscle mass, which at my age, 63, is, that's not to be expected. And that led me to start doing other things. And, you and I were talking about this, and I kept reading the isometric stuff as you put it up. Hoffman, every time you put out a chapter from Hoffman's book, I was reading it looking for things to do in my own workouts.
And which was the idea to say, hey, maybe it applies to you directly, but regardless, there's stuff in there that maybe you can apply either on its own or some experiments you can do, or, there's a lot of different ways to apply various isometric principles, even into different exercises that you might be doing already. And ultimately, most exercises have an isometric component anyway. So sometimes it's interesting to focus on that or to apply that in unusual ways. But that was pretty much the goal, to say, hey, here's some good resources that you can then take and then apply it in different ways into what you're doing and see what happens.
Absolutely. And so what I started doing was, really pulling a lot of things out of Hoffman's book and some other resources that I'd never used before. And, some worked really well, some worked not as well. But I kept fine tuning and working on what was going on. And then I was able to share it in the Dinosaur Files.
You've had an ongoing series, I think, since June or July?
July 2020.
For just some of the different ways you've applied isometrics and the different workouts. And I believe in all the issues since the last summer, you basically listed your workouts, said, hey, here's what I'm doing, rep by rep, set by set.
Yeah, and people have read that. You start with July, which is sort of the story of, hey, I read about isometrics at the Iron League website, started trying some things, and wow, didn't like isometrics before, or at least I didn't think I did, but I'm really kind of digging them now. So that's in the July issue, along with the workouts and the exercises I was doing, and in the August issue. And again, remember, no power rack, so I was having to use the isometric training methods that you can do without a power rack.
Which is also very useful now in being in the pandemic and all that, with all the gyms closed, with all the weight rooms closed. Basically, these are techniques that you can use in a spare bedroom or
Absolutely.
in your garage or in your driveway or whatever the case is. That ultimately, there's not having a gym is no longer an excuse.
Absolutely. And then I continued that. I didn't cover my workouts in the September issue, although I did cover some other isometric type training things, including a lot of leg things that you can do. But then back in the October issue again, in the November issue, and in the December issue, I've really been updating people almost in real time.
Sure.
On the workouts and the things that I'm doing and the different exercises and what's been working and what I've been finding, in terms of how long do you hold your isometric? Do you do an isometric exercise in all of the different possible positions, or do you do the start, middle, the finish of the movement? Do you have to do all of those? Is it okay to just do one of them? Can you vary those from workout to workout? How do you train your legs effectively with isometrics? How do you train, fill in the blank, any muscle in the body? And, the other thing is, how do you structure your workouts and your weekly schedule? How many times a week can you train? How many times a week should you train? And that's one where people are all over the ballpark. I mean, early isometrics, the idea was train every day.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm finding is, in my own case at least, train really, really hard with your isometric work and don't train as often. Sometimes twice a week works really well. 3 times a week is about the max.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't trained for 5 days. I'm training again today. And I absolutely know, my muscles feel full. They look full. And I'm going to go out, I'm going to do it after the podcast. I'm going to go out and I'm just going to have an absolutely killer workout because I'm that well rested.
Mm-hmm.
Which the muscles need, the tendons need, the ligaments need, everything, all the connective tissue, possibly even the bones need and appreciate that rest.
Mm-hmm.
The rest equals growth. So, these are all things I've been studying and learning and sharing. I'm sorry, you were going to say?
Well, just in this particular issue, the December issue, the Dino Files, you literally have a Q&A section where you address a lot of the questions that you've been receiving about your training, all the specifics, like what you just mentioned. How many times a week? What does a workout look like? Et cetera, et cetera. So, you're talking about a resource that if they want to follow along or if they want to apply certain things into their training, they can fall back on knowing here's what I suggest. Here's what my mindset is. And that itself can allow people who read it, who get this information, to make good choices in their own training.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And what all of these different issues of the Dinosaur Files would allow someone to do would be to rethink isometric training and consider it either as, for a while at least, possibly forever, but for a while at least, your primary focus of training, your primary training method, or your exclusive training method for a while. Or, and this is something else that I've covered in several articles in these various issues, and include one in the December 2020 issue as well, how to combine isometric work with other types of effective and productive strength training. with power rack training, bone strength training, heavy barbell work for regular sets and reps, heavy dumbbell work for regular sets and reps. What's the right balance? What do you do to stimulate the muscles, to stimulate muscular growth, to stimulate gains in strength, but not overtrain? And so, been trying to share a whole lot of ideas with people so that whatever somebody wants to do, whatever someone says, this sounds like a challenge that I want to try, they can try it and get good results.
Mm-hmm. And that also, I think is particularly important now during the lockdown, when all of a sudden people are looking for things to do. And this takes away the excuses, or it just allows them to say, hey, here's some ideas. Although it's interesting, if you go back to the history of isometrics, which we talked about earlier, the material from Hoffman, and his feeling was the various types of isometrics where I guess we could call self-resistance, where one arm pushing against the other or pushing against the door frame. He felt that this was miraculous in that it allowed the common person, old people, young people, children, whatever the case was, this allowed them to train in a certain way. No longer will there be any excuse for anyone in the world that you couldn't train. And in most cases, doing this in a fairly vigorous manner would give you pretty good results. Now, the logical next step was to employ the rack and the barbell and more substantial applications of this thing. But isometrics at its most traditional and common application was a way to at least address the need for physical fitness in most people's lives. And so, by kind of making that a little more known, instead of people saying, well, it didn't work for me, or, okay, well, in some cases it may be too elementary for what some people's goals are. But at the same time, there's a lot of people out there who would benefit from just simply doing something, whereas before they were doing nothing at all.
Absolutely. And the other thing about the isometrics and about everything that Hoffman thought of as isometrics and the things I've been testing and writing about, they let you do a whole lot of different and very effective things with virtually any training tool. Mm-hmm. For example, if all you have are a pair of 20-pound dumbbells, fixed weight 20-pound dumbbells, most people would think, well, I can't do anything with them. What am I going to do? Okay, well, maybe they're too light to do standard sets of dumbbell curls. But what happens if you try doing a 60-second hold with your 20-pound dumbbell, with the dumbbell in the midpoint position, the hardest possible position in the curl, 90 degrees from the floor. You hold it for 60 seconds. And then after that, pre-exhausting your muscles with that isometric hold, you do as many standard reps as you can do. Mm-hmm. Well, someone may say, well, that's still too easy because I'm really strong. Okay, fine. Then do a 2-minute hold or a 3-minute hold. It doesn't matter. The point is, you can do things that will work the heck out of your muscles by expanding what you consider to be, quote, the right way to train.
Sure.
And that's really important, as you said, in this era of COVID, where so many of us are dealing with not having the gym to go to. Mm-hmm. Can't go to the gym. We've got some equipment. We don't have everything we want or everything we need. So what are we going to do? Well, you start to get creative. Mm-hmm. And I think actually that's been one of the really unique things about 2020. One of the good things. There have been a lot of bad parts about 2020, but the need for creativity and strength training, I think, has really shown itself or has asserted itself in 2020. And you know what? That's probably a good thing. I mean, you sent an email out to your email list. You sent an email out today about a short rope arm exercise
Mhm.
that I don't think I've ever heard of before.
It
And
was partially influenced by Dr. Ken. It was doing a hammer curl with a rope, a short rope, but then also the application is to hold it, or is to do it with two hands and then hold it with one, with a weight that's slightly heavier than what you could do on your own. But it incorporates elements of negative training, of isometrics. It's deconstructing the different parts of the rep. I've gotten fabulous results from this type of thing, and it can be applied in other ways, which I will expand upon some other time. But this is just something interesting that I found. It's actually, in many ways, it's an offshoot of the way Joe Kinney trained with his secret weapon grip machine for closing the number 4 gripper. And that I've had some different experiments with kind of the same concept applied to other movements, and found it very unique. And I definitely get sore the next day. So something's going on.
yeah, the interesting thing about the exercise as you described it was not just here's how to do the exercise, but as you said, it's an exercise that involves a standard rep, an isometric, a negative component, very slow negative, and a rest pause component by virtue of changing the hand grip right and left. I mean, there are all kinds of neat things. And I was thinking, you do this, and you're also using the short rope, and a lot of the short ropes are actually thick ropes, like climbing ropes. It's not just a clothesline rope. So you've got thick bar training, except you're using a thick rope, right?
Yeah.
If you think about it, a thick bar builds the grip and the thumb isometrically. Okay, so you're doing that at the same time you're doing your other stuff. It's a real cool combination of stuff. And again, it's one where, depending on how you change these elements and how they interact on each rep, you can get a really good workout with anything from, gosh, I would say probably 20 or 25 pounds on up to 40 or 50 pounds if you're a real stud, but you vary it depending on how you do the exercise. So again, it's a way that you can do all kinds of stuff. And again, just staying on that for a second, if someone had one of the short ropes and either one dumbbell or a kettlebell or a couple of barbell plates or a sandbag or a duffel bag, anything that you could load up for weight resistance, you would get a tremendous workout. So that's what we're trying to, and that's what people used to share in the magazines, and that's what I'm trying to share in the Dinosaur Files.
Absolutely. Well, it was you mentioned Peter Yates. You talked to get some ideas from him, and he has an article in this issue, along with another gentleman, Bill Poncetta, who's talks about his own training at the age of 67. But I think that it's important in both these cases that here's other people that are sharing, here's what's working for me, here's what I'm doing right now. And you may not necessarily take what they're doing and apply it into your own training, but I think it's interesting and valuable, if you're into training in any capacity anyway, to study how other people train. Sometimes it gives you ideas, sometimes it just reinforces what you're already doing, and both of those have value.
Yeah, and I would suggest for the younger trainees, obviously we have a lot of information for the older trainees, but we also have information for younger trainees. And remember, if you're a younger trainee now, the goal is for you to end up being an older trainee someday, meaning we want you to keep on training forever. And to do that, you need to know how to make adjustments over time. You need to be aware of how your body changes as you age and what effect that has on your training. And for gosh sake, if you're a gym owner or a trainer or any kind of fitness professional, strength professional, you need to know how to work with older trainees.
Mhm.
You know, because I guarantee if all you do are train 20-year-olds and you ever have the opportunity to train someone in their 50s or 60s or 70s, what works for the 20-year-olds is not going to work for the older folks.
Although it does go the other way around, in that what works for the older folks will work for the younger folks. And that's also kind of an important lesson.
Yeah, and that's one that most people have an awfully hard time learning.
Mhm.
In part because of that whole forgotten man issue
Mhm.
that Rader alluded to.
Well, I mean, there's a window for training like a meathead.
That's true.
You can, it's only going to last so long before you either burn out or injure yourself, and you know that is a lesson in and of itself.
That's true. And you know, that's you mentioned something I hadn't thought of before, but one thing we have in the Dinosaur Files over the years, we have a lot of comeback stories.
Mm.
You know, people who've been hurt one way or another, sometimes training related, sometimes sports related, martial arts related, auto accident, whatever, and they have to make that long, slow comeback, and they share that journey. And those articles, I think, are really valuable because everybody sooner or later has to make a comeback journey of some sort, one way or another. You get hurt. It's just life.
Sure.
It's not necessarily training related, but it happens, and you need to know how to deal with it. And the only way is to find people who love the iron the way you do and follow their journey and get some ideas that way.
Mm-hmm.
So that's always been an interesting part of the Dinosaur Files that I've always enjoyed.
Mm-hmm. And you finish this issue up with a topic that I'm sure you get a lot of emails on. I know I do. Nutrition. This is how you're an update on what you're doing now, nutrition wise. And I think a lot of people would be very interested in reading what you have to say.
And again, the word is update.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because I do a lot of testing, a lot of experiments. I try a lot of different things, both training wise and diet and nutrition wise. Some work, some don't work very well, some are really bad. You know, but I'm my own guinea pig, I guess. I'm a lab rat in my own laboratory.
Mm-hmm.
And pardon?
I was going to say nutrition is kind of for lack of a better term, a hot button issue in that a lot of people, especially now with the popularity of various supplements and exotic foodstuffs, you know, you're going to be bombarded with ads and things that are going to want to compel you or get you to try various substances that may or may not be useful, valid, and in some cases may be more problems than they're worth. So getting some good, solid nutrition advice from somebody who's knows what they're talking about is valuable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very true. Particularly, it's particularly valuable if cash is tight, because supplements nowadays are incredibly expensive. And it helps to know, what do you need? I mean, you know, what do you really need? Where do you put your dollars for the maximum bang? You know, get the maximum bang for your buck. Mm-hmm. And, you know, that's a discussion that you don't see many places. Mm-hmm. Or if you do, it's with someone marketing something, selling something where, you know, the only discussion is here, buy my stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's easy to get lost and confused with what the choices are out there. And in some cases, some people have, I know you've told me about this, you know, several people that they took a supplement of some sort and ended up in the emergency room having some kind of allergic reaction to something that they should have known better about. So there's that to also factor in for this type of information. Yeah,
that's very true. And then, you know, the other thing is just look at it this way. Diet and nutrition is something that everybody writes about, and it's all over the media world and the social media world. It's everywhere. It's in newspapers, it's in magazines. I'm not talking about strength training magazines. I'm talking about any magazine anywhere has diet nutrition stuff. You get bombarded with it on Facebook and other social media. But how much of what you see is written by people who are in the trenches, training week in, week out, hard, heavy, serious. Very, very little of it. Very little of it. And that's what you need to be thinking about. And thinking, what does someone like me, someone my age, someone who, has been training as long as I have, someone who trains the way I train, what does proper nutrition look like for that person? And so to get the answer to that, I would submit your best resource is a person like you. Hence the importance in my mind of the Dino Files, the Iron League, similar ways of conveying information to people that is from the trenches. Go back and use your phrase, which, by the way, we didn't rehearse this. We don't have the word, we don't have "in the trenches" written down as like the lead-off opening for this. It's the perfect phrase. It captures everything.
And I think when you live it, when this is just simply a part of your life, it's easy to find that type of thing, those words, because that's what's going on.
That's true. Yeah.
So I think we're getting to the end here. We've been going almost about 45 minutes, longer than 45 minutes. But what I want to do is this. What we're going to do is put a link to the Dinosaur Files newsletter in the comments or section of the video so people can find it and ideally order some of the issues that Brooks has mentioned. And then you can also find Brooks on his website, www.brookskubik.com. You can find me at various websites. Ironleague.com is the one we talked about. That's where you find the isometrics course. Oldtimestrongman.com is probably my main website, functionalhandstrength.com. A lot of people watching this or reading this or listening to this will be familiar with what I have to offer. But the other thing that before we close out is that I want to mention that if you have questions on either anything that we have discussed in the podcast or in an email or something of that nature, feel free to send it to me, send it to Brooks, and for future episodes, we'll be able to address a lot of those.
That would be a lot of fun. It's always interesting to get questions from folks and be able to hopefully provide good answers to them.
So with that, I think we're going to sign off. Dinosaur Radio #1, and we will see you next time.
So long, everyone.